Hi there. This is going to be the start of a different pathway or an alternative learning method for biology. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go through this PowerPoint. I'll talk through it, and all the information comes from our textbook. So if you want a hard copy of the textbook, make sure you let me know the next time you're in class, or shoot me an email and I can check one out for you if you are virtual. Otherwise, everybody does have access to this online. So this is where all of our information is pretty much going to come from. So to start, we are going to talk about a little story that we kind of follow along. We touch base, we go back and forth between this story as well as like all of our lesson material in our chapter 5 here. So this story based off a couple of researchers that have found this unusual bacteria that doesn't really photosynthesize and it doesn't really cellular respirate. It creates its own energy, or it transfers, I should say, its own energy in a unique way. So the way that this bacteria does is by eating rocks. So you can learn a little bit more about that in the reading of our text. So the objectives are all right here. This is what you're going to be able to do or know by the time you are done with this. And here are our standards. And then to start, reading-wise, we would be introduced to Annie Rowe. She is a researcher, and she found these bacteria and kind of wondered what they were. So the story starts off with her. Now, like I said before, these strange bacteria that this Annie Rowe had found do not get energy in a normal way. But energy is essential for all types of life. So it's made, or I guess created or transferred, so we can grow, we can develop, we can reproduce, we can protect ourselves. But ultimately, they do everything, or we need energy to do everything that our body needs us to do. And the first law, I put energy in italics right there because it's actually called the first law of thermodynamics. But if you want to think of it as the first law of energy, it's a little bit easier. But basically, it states that energy cannot be created nor can it be destroyed. Cells must utilize one form of energy and change it to another form in order to fully utilize it. Organisms obtain energy from living or non-living components within their ecosystems. So basically, the majority of our energy is given to us from the sun, and the sun transmits energy through what we call light energy, and that light energy is used in photosynthesis, and then from photosynthesis, that changes the light energy into chemical energy, and then for us as humans, we turn that chemical energy into another usable form of energy. Regardless of whatever energy we're talking about, this is basically the explanation, or it wouldn't happen if we did not have the transfer of electrons. The sum of all chemical reactions in our body that is powered by energy is called metabolism, and that is just one thing to kind of keep in mind as we go through. Metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions that happen in our bodies, and that includes the storing and the releasing of energy. We have different kinds of metabolic pathways. They either create things or they break things down, and we'll get into detail about this later on in our PowerPoint. So the main two pathways that we will focus on are photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Plants photosynthesize, animals, or consumers, I should say, cellular respirate. Here's just a good graphic that's in your textbook. Kind of shows the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration. You guys can see a comparison. What goes in and what comes out, they're very, very, very similar. Now, there's going to be throughout this PowerPoint a couple of stop and think slides. So far, stop and think. What is, according to this image right here, why is photosynthesis called primary production? How does animal life depend on photosynthesis? And then explain how photosynthesis and cellular respiration are complementary processes. So how are they related? Now, these questions are not anything you guys need to turn in. Just pause this, stop, and think about it before you continue on. Now, to get into the nitty-gritties of photosynthesis, It's the way that our planet stores energy from the sun and produces oxygen for animals, like us humans, to breathe. It occurs in all plants and some bacteria, and it takes place inside of the organelle in plant cells called the chloroplast. And the chloroplast contains like these green pancakes called thylakoids, and then within that they have the pigment of chlorophyll, and that is what we need in order to photosynthesize. So here's a picture of those green pancakes, or our thylakoids. Now within photosynthesis we have two stages. The first stage is called the light reaction. The second stage is called the Calvin cycle, or the light independent reaction, or also sometimes called the dark reaction. So basically within the light reaction we are using sunlight, the energy from the sun, to zap the water molecules apart. So we're going to, inside the thylakoid. So the hydrogen is going to go this way, the oxygen is going to go this way, and the oxygen is actually going to come out of the process, and that is how oxygen gets put into the atmosphere through plants. Very, very simplified version, of course. Now in the Calvin cycle, we don't use the energy anymore from the sun. We take what we get from the light reaction, so the ATP and the hydrogen, then it moves over to the Calvin cycle, and then we take carbon dioxide and some more energy to fixate, so turning carbons into sugars, and then combining everything to make our final source of energy of glucose. So here is a pretty simple version or a diagram of what's actually happening. And then down underneath the diagram, you guys will see the equation for photosynthesis. 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 waters plus the light energy makes glucose, which is that C6H12O6, plus our oxygen. So here's another stop and think. A couple of questions. What is the source of the carbon dioxide used for photosynthesis? So where are we getting that? Which products of the light reaction does the Calvin cycle use? And then I know on your screen, question number 3 is cut off a little bit, but that is, what are the 2 major products of photosynthesis? So to wrap up, I give you 2 choices here to watch: the textbook animation, which gets a pretty into detail there, or the Amoeba Sisters video. Both of these links will be available to you in Canvas outside of this PowerPoint. Now we're getting into cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is basically the opposite metabolic pathway of photosynthesis, and that is what animals, including us as humans, do in order to get our energy. What cellular respiration is when we break down carbons and create a bunch of ATP. It's the main way that animals obtain energy. So how does cellular respiration work? It works in 3 main steps: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and then the electron transport chain, or your textbook calls it the oxidative phosphorylation. So again, we're taking in all of that glucose, all that sugar, so all the foods that we eat, and we're breaking it down into carbon dioxide, water, and electrons, essentially. And those electrons come together to create ATP. So here is a picture of what's going on. The mitochondria is an organelle that we're really concerned with when we have cellular respiration going on. And if we have oxygen, that means that we will create a lot more ATP than if we don't have oxygen. So first step is glycolysis. This is anaerobic, meaning no oxygen is required. This happens outside of the mitochondria, so it happens in our cytoplasm. And basically what happens is that we are converting glucose into 2 things called pyruvates. So we're breaking down our glucose and we're turning it into something that we can use then later on to carry out the different processes. The second step to cellular respiration is the Krebs cycle. So again, this is also anaerobic, so no oxygen is required here, but we are taking the pyruvates, so what we created in glycolysis, and we are putting it through a cycle driven by a bunch of enzymes. And enzymes are little molecules that speed up chemical reactions under ideal conditions. Now, if their conditions aren't right, these enzymes are not going to work. So if the temperature is too hot or too cold, or if the pH is too acidic or basic, it's not going to work. So what these enzymes do, they speed up this whole process. So we're breaking down that pyruvate, and we're going to release carbon dioxide, and then we're going to create a couple of more energy molecules to carry over to our third step. And our third step is oxidative phosphorylation, or the electron transport chain. It's the same thing, two different names. And this is our final step. This is the one step that does require oxygen. And what happens here is that all of the products that were produced in the first two steps come together to basically turn on a little molecule that has ATP synthase, which is another enzyme, and we're going to combine all that stuff and we're going to pump out ATP. A bunch of ATP comes out here. And again, we have to have oxygen in this step. If we don't have oxygen, then we do not create the amounts of ATP that we need. Now, another stop and think, because that was a lot of information. What products are produced in cellular respiration? And how is cellular respiration and photosynthesis similar? Now, we're going to get into a different way here of cellular respiration without oxygen, and that is called fermentation. So there are some organisms that do ferment. So some organisms that live in environments that don't have a lot of oxygen. So bacteria that live at the bottom of the seafloor, or just baking, I guess, when we're creating breads or beer or wine or yogurt. Food industry is huge on fermentation. So what this happens is that this whole process enables the ability to create ATP through glycolysis alone. And this happens in the cytoplasms of cells. Again, this does not require oxygen, but hardly any energy is created here because, again, we don't have oxygen. We have a couple of different byproducts. We have alcohol and carbon dioxide as one byproduct, and then we have lactic acid as another byproduct. So if we are going to the lactic acid side of fermentation, that's what humans do when we are exercising, when we're putting ourselves through really heavy endurance activities that we do not allow our muscles to feed off of the amount of oxygen that they need in order to work out. We produce lactic acid. Now that lactic acid gives us that burning sensation in our muscles. You all know what I'm talking about. After a good solid workout, a couple hours later, when you start to relax and you settle down, your muscles start to feel it. Well, that feeling it is because of the lactic acid. Now, on the other side, where we produce carbon dioxide and alcohol, that is in our food industry with baking, so baking breads, anything that has yeast in it, as well as making beer and wine. Now to stop and think, here you go, your final 3 questions of stop and think. And then, just like for photosynthesis, you can choose a couple of animations to watch. And then the last bit here, like I said in the first couple of slides, we're going to talk about 2 different metabolic pathways. So we have anabolism and then catabolism. So photosynthesis is an example of anabolism where we're creating molecules. Catabolism is the metabolic pathway where we break down things to build more. So that's cellular respiration. And here's just a nice little graphic for that. With anabolism, we throw in energy to bring things together. Catabolism, we break things apart and it releases energy. Energy carriers, ATP, NADPH, just a little bit more info on that. ATP, this is not going to go away. This is our main energy molecule. So if throughout this whole entire PowerPoint, if you were wondering what I was talking about ATP, adenosine triphosphate is our main energy molecule, and you can read about it here, and it goes in depth in our textbook as well. Basically, we get our energy when that phosphate, that last P, breaks off and a bunch of energy gets released. And here just kind of talks about a little bit more info on that. And then here are our essential questions. So questions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here. These are what you guys will need to answer for our assignment. And that's kind of all I really have for you guys today. A lot of information. Again, this is pretty heavy stuff. So For your assignment, rather than doing all your CK12 quizzes, you can just answer the